Never underestimate the quiet person walking out of the room, because sometimes the future of everyone left behind is walking out with them. Nathan Brooks had learned long ago that arguing rarely changed a person's mind, but character always revealed itself when the conversation ended. That lesson stayed with him as he sat quietly inside the executive boardroom of Sterling Dynamics overlooking downtown Seattle, surrounded by polished glass walls, glowing financial presentations, and senior executives who believed they already understood exactly who he was. Claire Whitmore stood confidently at the head of the conference table, every detail of her tailored ivory business suit reflecting the success that had made her one of the youngest billionaire chief executive officers in the country. She looked across the room with calm authority before finally stopping at Nathan. "We appreciate your years of service," she said in a measured voice, "but our company is entering a new phase. We need leaders who move faster, think differently, and fit the future we are building." The room remained perfectly still. Nathan simply nodded once. He had spent more than a decade designing systems that quietly supported nearly every major product Sterling Dynamics had launched, yet very few people in the room knew the full extent of his work. He had never been interested in taking credit. He believed the strongest foundations were the ones nobody noticed until they disappeared. Claire continued speaking with professional confidence. "Today will be your final day with Sterling Dynamics." Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, but nobody challenged the decision. Nathan slowly closed his notebook, placed his employee identification badge beside it, and stood without the slightest sign of anger. There was no dramatic speech. There was no attempt to defend himself. There was only quiet dignity. "Thank you for the opportunity," he replied with genuine sincerity. "I hope the company continues to succeed." His calm response unsettled more people than an argument ever could. As Nathan walked through the engineering floor, carrying a small cardboard box filled with family photographs, a coffee mug, and a few notebooks filled with handwritten technical sketches, dozens of employees looked up from their desks. Some wanted to speak, but remained silent. Others lowered their eyes, unsure how someone so respected could leave without anyone fighting for him. Nathan smiled politely at every familiar face before stepping into the elevator. Moments later, the lobby doors opened, and the cool Seattle afternoon greeted him with a gentle breeze. Waiting on a nearby bench sat his 11-year-old son, Owen, holding a library book across his knees exactly as he did every Friday after school. The boy immediately recognized the cardboard box and stood without asking unnecessary questions. "Are we going home early today?" he asked softly. Nathan smiled with reassuring warmth. "Looks like we are." Owen nodded with complete trust, and together they walked toward the old blue pickup truck parked beneath a row of maple trees. As they drove away through steady afternoon traffic, Nathan talked about making homemade tomato soup for dinner and helping with a science project before bedtime. Not once did he complain about losing his job. Back inside Sterling Dynamics, executives returned to their meetings believing the difficult decision was already behind them. Nobody noticed that one small yellow notification had quietly appeared on the central system's dashboard deep inside the operations center. It was not flashing. It was not loud. It simply displayed an unusually long processing delay that almost everyone dismissed as insignificant. A junior engineer glanced at the warning before clearing it from the screen, assuming another team would investigate later. Within minutes, a second delay appeared, then a third. Hidden beneath layers of sophisticated software, something old had quietly begun waking up, and the one person who understood its forgotten heartbeat was already driving farther away with his son, leaving behind a company that had just made the most expensive mistake of its history without realizing it. Nathan Brooks had always believed that the true measure of a difficult day was not how it ended at work, but how he chose to walk through the front door at home. As the old blue pickup truck rolled into the driveway of their modest suburban house just outside Seattle, Owen quietly climbed out, carrying his backpack and library book without asking another question about the cardboard box resting on the passenger seat. He knew his father well enough to understand that silence sometimes carried more honesty than 100 explanations. Nathan unlocked the front door with the same calm routine he had followed for years. He placed the box on a hallway shelf, hung his jacket by the entrance, and smiled as though nothing important had changed. "How about tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches tonight?" he asked. Owen's face brightened immediately. "Can I help?" Nathan laughed softly. "You always do." Soon the familiar sounds of home filled the small kitchen. Butter sizzled gently in a skillet, fresh tomatoes simmered in a pot, and the smell of toasted bread slowly replaced every trace of the long afternoon. Owen carefully sliced vegetables while Nathan stirred the soup with practiced patience. After several quiet minutes, Owen finally asked the question that had been waiting since they left downtown. "Are you worried?" Nathan looked toward the kitchen window, where the evening sun painted warm colors across the neighborhood. "A little," he admitted honestly, "but a job can change. The kind of person you become should never depend on a paycheck." Owen nodded thoughtfully before returning to his cutting board. Those words settled into the room as naturally as the evening light. Later, while they ate dinner together, they talked about Owen's upcoming science project, a baseball game plan for the weekend, and a library book he had already nearly finished. Nathan never criticized Claire Whitmore, never complained about Sterling Dynamics, and never spoke with bitterness. He understood that resentment was a burden far heavier than the cardboard box, now resting quietly near the front door. Across the city, however, the atmosphere inside Sterling Dynamics had begun changing in ways nobody expected. The small yellow notification that appeared earlier in the afternoon had quietly multiplied into several warning indicators scattered throughout the company's monitoring systems. Processing delays became slightly longer. Internal applications responded a fraction of a second slower. Customers noticed nothing, but engineers certainly did. In the operations center, Michael Carter, the company's chief technology officer, stood before a wall of glowing dashboards studying performance graphs that refused to behave normally. "Has anyone identified the source?" he asked calmly. Several engineers exchanged uncertain looks before one finally answered. "We have checked the servers, network traffic, database performance, and cloud resources. Everything appears healthy, but the delays continue spreading." Michael frowned. The data made little sense. Every modern component appeared stable, yet something unseen was quietly slowing the entire platform. Upstairs, Claire reviewed investor updates while assistants prepared documents for the following week's meetings. She briefly glanced an internal message describing minor performance irregularities before placing it aside. "Monitor it," she instructed confidently. "If customers are unaffected, engineering will resolve it." The message disappeared beneath more urgent business priorities. Back in the small suburban kitchen, Nathan washed the dinner dishes while Owen dried them with a faded blue towel. They laughed when one slippery plate nearly slipped into the sink, and for a few peaceful moments the world felt wonderfully ordinary. Before bedtime, Nathan helped Owen build a small model for his science assignment using cardboard, glue, and color markers spread across the dining table. As they worked together, Nathan quietly noticed how traffic moved through the tiny paper streets Owen had drawn. Cars waited patiently at intersections before continuing forward. He smiled without realizing why the simple image lingered in his thoughts. Miles away, inside Sterling Dynamics, another unnoticed delay quietly appeared deep within the company's oldest software layer, hidden beneath years of newer technology, waiting for someone who still remembered how that forgotten road had originally been built. Nathan Brooks woke before sunrise the following morning, just as he had every weekday for years, even though there was no office waiting for him anymore. Old habits built through responsibility did not disappear simply because a company decided they no longer mattered. He prepared pancakes for Owen before school, packed his son's lunch, and reminded him to bring the science project they had finished together the night before. As they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, sunlight slowly filled the room with quiet warmth. Owen looked thoughtfully at his father before asking, "What are you going to do today?" Nathan smiled gently while pouring orange juice into 2 glasses. "First, I'm going to drive you to school. Then I'm going to update my resume. After that, I will probably organize the garage. There is always useful work to do." Owen accepted the answer with the complete trust only a child could offer. Before stepping out the front door, He looked back and said, "You always figure things out." Nathan smiled, but those simple words stayed with him long after the old pickup truck disappeared from the school parking lot. Across Seattle, Sterling Dynamics was facing a very different morning. The small delays that engineers had dismissed the previous afternoon had quietly grown into a pattern that no monitoring software could ignore. Internal applications began responding several seconds slower than expected. Automated reports arrived late. Customer support representatives started receiving calls from confused clients asking why account updates seemed delayed. Inside the operations center, glowing dashboards displayed more yellow warning indicators than anyone had ever seen at the same time. Michael Carter stood silently before the largest monitoring screen, while engineers moved quickly between workstations, searching through millions of lines of diagnostic data. "What changed yesterday?" Michael asked. No one answered immediately. Every software update had been verified. Every server reported healthy performance. Every cloud service remained operational. Yet something invisible continued spreading through the system like a slow-moving traffic jam with no visible accident ahead. Upstairs, Claire Whitmore entered the executive conference room expecting another routine strategy meeting, only to find several senior managers already waiting with unusually serious expressions. Michael joined the meeting moments later, carrying a tablet filled with system reports. "We have a problem," he said calmly. "Performance degradation is accelerating across multiple services, and we still do not know why." Claire frowned while reviewing the charts. "How serious?" Michael answered honestly. "Not catastrophic yet, but if we do not identify the source soon, customers will begin noticing significant delays." The room became unusually quiet. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, Claire realized the company's greatest threat was not outside competition, but something hidden deep within technology everyone believed they understood. Later that afternoon, Nathan returned home after organizing the garage and submitting several job applications online. Owen spread his science project across the dining table once again, adding tiny paper cars to the cardboard streets they had built together. As Nathan watched him carefully position each vehicle, Owen suddenly frowned. "Dad, why are all these cars waiting even though the road ahead is empty?" Nathan looked closer. "Because the light is still red," he answered. Owen tilted his head. "But if the road is already clear, why does the light keep making everyone wait?" Nathan's smile slowly disappeared. His eyes remained fixed on the tiny paper intersection while something deep inside his memory quietly awakened. Years earlier, he had designed an authorization queue inside Sterling Dynamics that worked almost exactly like those miniature traffic lights, allowing digital requests to move safely through the system before continuing forward. If that timing mechanism somehow failed after years of software updates, healthy systems could begin waiting for permission that no longer needed to exist. Nathan did not speak for several long seconds. Then he quietly reached for a blank sheet of paper and began sketching boxes, arrows, and timing cycles from memory, while Owen watched with curious fascination. Hundreds of miles of computer code suddenly seemed as simple as toy cars waiting at a paper intersection. And somewhere inside Sterling Dynamics, thousands of digital requests were still sitting patiently at an invisible red light that almost everyone else had forgotten was ever there. Nathan Brooks looked down at the sketch he had drawn beside Owen's cardboard streets, and the more he stared at the simple arrows and timing cycles, the more certain he became that the growing crisis inside Sterling Dynamics had nothing to do with failing hardware or overloaded servers. It felt like an old memory quietly knocking on a locked door. Years ago, before rapid expansion and countless software upgrades, he had designed a synchronization process that regulated the order in which millions of digital requests traveled through the company's core platform. It had been intentionally invisible because invisible systems rarely attracted unnecessary attention. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into a notebook before helping Owen finish his homework. There was no reason to think about a company that had already decided it no longer needed him. If they asked for help, he would answer honestly. If they did not, he would continue moving forward with the same quiet determination that had carried him through every challenge since becoming a single father. The following morning, Sterling Dynamics no longer felt like the confident technology leader it had been only 48 hours earlier. Engineers gathered around conference tables covered with laptops, handwritten notes, and empty coffee cups. The monitoring dashboards glowed with an endless stream of yellow alerts that were gradually turning orange as response times continued increasing. Customers had begun reporting delayed transactions, and several important business partners requested immediate explanations. Michael Carter listened carefully as one engineering team after another presented theories that sounded convincing but failed every practical test. Nothing explained why every modern component appeared healthy while the entire platform continued slowing together. He remained silent until one senior engineer quietly said, "This almost feels like something buried underneath everything else." Michael stopped writing. Those words echoed in his mind with uncomfortable familiarity. Buried underneath everything else. He opened an archive containing technical documents dating back more than a decade. Hundreds of files appeared, many written by engineers who had long since left the company. Then he found a familiar name repeated across dozens of foundational architecture documents. Nathan Brooks. Michael leaned back in his chair as forgotten memories slowly returned. Nathan had never enjoyed presentations or executive meetings. While others competed for recognition, he stayed in server rooms, whiteboard sessions, and late-night design reviews solving problems that nobody else even realized existed. Many of the company's youngest engineers had never worked beside him because the strongest parts of his work had become so reliable that people simply assumed they had always existed. Michael opened one of Nathan's original diagrams and stared at a familiar synchronization model. His heartbeat quickened. It looked remarkably similar to the unexplained bottleneck now spreading throughout the production environment. Without wasting another minute, he walked directly to Claire Whitmore's office. She looked up from a stack of investor reports as he entered. "Have you found the cause?" she asked. Michael answered carefully. "I believe we may have dismissed the one person who understands it better than anyone else." Claire remained quiet for several seconds before asking, "Are you talking about Nathan?" Michael nodded once. This system was built in layers over many years, but the deepest foundation carries his fingerprints everywhere. We have brilliant engineers, but they're trying to solve a puzzle without seeing the original picture. Claire slowly closed the report in front of her. Confidence gave way to reflection. She realized she had evaluated Nathan by recent visibility rather than lasting contribution. Outside the office windows, gray clouds drifted across the Seattle skyline, while inside the building every passing minute carried greater uncertainty. That afternoon, as Nathan finished replacing a loose shelf in the garage and prepared to leave for Owen's school pickup, his cell phone vibrated on the workbench. He glanced at the screen and quietly recognized the caller. "Michael Carter." Nathan let the phone ring twice before answering with the same calm voice he always carried. "Good afternoon, Michael." There was a brief pause before Michael spoke. "Nathan, I know I'm asking a great deal after everything that happened, but Sterling Dynamics needs your help, and I do not believe this is about saving a company anymore. It is about protecting the people who depend on it." Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, not because he felt anger, but because he understood exactly how much was now resting on a decision that had nothing to do with pride. Nathan Brooks remained silent for several seconds after Michael Carter finished speaking. He looked through the garage door toward the quiet neighborhood, where children were riding bicycles home from school and neighbors were mowing their lawns without any idea that a technology company across Seattle was slowly losing control of the systems supporting thousands of businesses. Finally, Nathan answered with the same steady voice that had always earned respect from the people who truly knew him. "I will come because innocent people should not suffer for decisions they did not make." Michael released a quiet breath of relief. "Thank you. We're sending a car." Nathan gently shook his head, even though Michael could not see him. "That will not be necessary. I will pick up Owen from school first, make sure he is settled with our neighbor, and then I will drive myself." Less than an hour later, the familiar blue pickup truck rolled into the parking garage beneath Sterling Dynamics. Several employees noticed Nathan walking through the lobby, carrying nothing except a worn notebook and a pen. There was no dramatic entrance. No reporters. No applause. Only curious eyes following the quiet engineer who had been dismissed only 2 days earlier. Michael met him near the operations center and extended his hand. Nathan accepted it with a warm smile that carried neither resentment nor pride. "Thank you for coming," Michael said. Nathan simply replied, "Show me what the system is trying to say." Inside the operations center, dozens of engineers stepped aside as Nathan approached the wall of monitoring screens. He spent several minutes saying nothing at all. His eyes moved slowly across graphs, response times, processing queues, and historical trends. Instead of searching for what was broken, he searched for what still behaved exactly as expected. Then he quietly asked, "Has anyone looked beneath the synchronization layer?" Several engineers exchanged confused glances. One answered, "That module has not been modified in years." Nathan nodded gently. "Exactly." He requested access to an archive that very few employees even knew still existed. As old architectural diagrams appeared on the screen, younger engineers watched with growing surprise. Every diagram carried the same author's name, Nathan Brooks. One engineer whispered, "You wrote all of these?" Nathan smiled modestly. "A great many people helped build this platform. I simply happened to be here when the foundation was poured." He continued examining the diagrams until he stopped at one specific page. "Here it is," he said softly. "The authorization timing sequence." Michael leaned closer. "Can this really affect the entire platform?" Nathan pointed calmly at several interconnected processes. Think of an interstate highway during rush hour. The road itself is perfectly clear, but every entrance ramp is controlled by a traffic light that suddenly waits too long before turning green. The highway is healthy. The cars are healthy. Yet everything slows because permission arrives too late. The room became completely silent as engineers compared Nathan's explanation with the live monitoring data. Every graph aligned almost perfectly with his simple analogy. One senior developer quickly searched recent software updates before looking up with disbelief. A security optimization changed the waiting interval without anyone realizing this older timing system still depended on the original values. Nathan nodded once. The newer software assumed the old foundation no longer mattered, but foundations continue carrying weight long after people forget they exist. Working calmly beside the engineering teams rather than above them, Nathan suggested a careful temporary adjustment instead of a risky permanent change. Within minutes, the first performance graphs began improving. Yellow warning indicators slowly disappeared one after another. Response times shortened. Internal applications recovered. Customer reports stopped increasing. A wave of quiet relief spread throughout the operations center. But Nathan showed no celebration. He simply continued monitoring every system until he was certain stability had truly returned. Standing behind the engineers, Claire Whitmore watched the entire process without saying a word. For the first time, she realized that the man she had judged by recent visibility had quietly built the invisible structure that allowed everyone else to shine, and the greatest strength inside her company had never been the loudest voice in the room, but the quiet architect who had never asked anyone to notice his work. The operations center slowly returned to its familiar rhythm as the final warning indicators disappeared from the monitoring screens. Yet Nathan Brooks remained exactly where he was, quietly reviewing every performance graph one last time before closing the final diagnostic window. He thanked each engineer who had worked beside him and answered every technical question with patience, never speaking as though he had rescued anyone, but as though they had solved the problem together. Several younger engineers gathered around him, eager to understand the forgotten architecture that had nearly brought the company to a standstill. Nathan smiled warmly and explained each concept with simple examples, comparing software systems to neighborhoods, highways, and families where every part depended on another part being respected. His ability to teach without making anyone feel small impressed everyone who listened. After nearly an hour, Michael Carter quietly approached Claire Whitmore, who had not moved from the back of the room since the system stabilized. "There is something you should see," he said. They walked into the company archive, where shelves of old project binders had long been, replaced by digital records stored inside a secure document library. Michael opened Nathan's employment history and projected it onto a large display. Claire expected to see the record of a reliable senior engineer. Instead, she found herself reading the hidden history of the company itself. Year after year, Nathan's name appeared beside the largest technological breakthroughs Sterling Dynamics had ever achieved. The original cloud migration, the disaster recovery framework, the synchronization architecture, the security authorization model, the distributed processing engine. Every milestone that investors proudly celebrated had quietly begun with design documents carrying Nathan's signature. Claire looked up in disbelief. Why was he never promoted into executive leadership? Michael answered with a quiet smile. He was offered those positions more than once. Claire turned back toward the screen. Then why did he refuse? Michael opened another file containing handwritten notes from several years earlier. The date immediately caught Claire's attention because it matched the period shortly after Nathan's wife had passed away. One sentence stood out above every other document. "I cannot accept additional travel because my son needs me at home more than the company needs another executive." Another record showed that Nathan had voluntarily requested fewer leadership responsibilities so he could leave the office before dinner each evening. Performance reviews described him as exceptionally gifted, but consistently choosing mentorship over recognition and stability over ambition. Michael quietly folded his hands. Most people assumed he lacked interest in advancement. The truth is that he already knew what success meant to him. Claire remained silent as she continued reading. She found dozens of letters from employees thanking Nathan for helping them learn difficult technical skills, recommending them for promotions, or quietly staying late to solve problems without ever placing his own name on the final reports. Not one document contained complaints, personal demands, or requests for special treatment. The deeper she searched, the more she realized that Nathan had spent years building not only software, but people. His greatest achievement had never appeared on a quarterly earnings report because it lived inside the confidence of those he had encouraged. Claire slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she questioned the way she had measured value inside the company. She had rewarded visibility, presentation skills, and rapid results while overlooking the quiet consistency that allowed everyone else to succeed. At that very moment, Nathan stood outside the building beside his old blue pickup truck, returning a borrowed visitor badge to the security desk before preparing to leave. He checked the time and smiled softly, realizing he would still arrive at Owen's school in time for afternoon pickup. Inside the executive office, Claire watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as the small truck pulled away from the parking lot. It struck her with unexpected force that the man driving away had never asked for an apology, never demanded recognition, and never reminded anyone of everything he had done. His dignity had spoken more clearly than any speech ever could. And for the first time, she understood that the strongest leaders were often the ones who quietly chose responsibility over applause, leaving behind a legacy so deeply woven into the lives of others that many people only recognized its value after it was almost gone. The following Monday morning felt strangely different inside Sterling Dynamics. The emergency had passed, the systems were stable again, and customers never realized how close the company had come to a major failure. Yet the quiet confidence that once filled the executive floor had been replaced by reflection. Claire Whitmore stood alone inside the boardroom, where only a few days earlier she had confidently ended Nathan Brooks's employment. The polished conference table, the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the skyline beyond them looked exactly the same, but she no longer saw the room through the same eyes. Every chair reminded her that leadership was not simply about making decisions. It was about understanding the people affected by them. She called Michael Carter into her office. "Arrange an all-company meeting this afternoon," she said. "Everyone should be there if possible." Michael looked at her for a moment before quietly nodding. "I believe that is the right decision." Meanwhile, Nathan spent the morning exactly as he had planned. He helped Owen prepare for school, submitted another job application, and repaired a loose gate in the backyard before enjoying a simple cup of coffee on the porch. His telephone rang shortly after noon. Claire's name appeared on the screen. Nathan answered politely. "Good afternoon, Claire." There was a brief silence before she spoke. Her confident executive voice had been replaced by something far more personal. "Nathan, I owe you an apology, and I do not believe it belongs in a private conversation. Would you be willing to come to the office this afternoon?" Nathan considered the request for only a moment. "If it will help people move forward, I will come." Later that afternoon, nearly every employee gathered inside the large company auditorium. Engineers stood beside accountants. Customer support representatives sat beside software designers. The atmosphere carried quiet curiosity because very few people knew why the meeting had been called with such short notice. Claire stepped onto the stage and looked across hundreds of familiar faces before taking a slow breath. "Last week, I made a decision that I believed served the future of this company," she began. "I judged one of our most dedicated employees by what I could immediately see instead of everything he had quietly built over many years. I failed to recognize that some of the strongest contributions are almost invisible because they're supporting everyone else." She paused before continuing. "Leadership requires accountability, especially when the mistake belongs to the leader." At that moment, Nathan entered through the back of the auditorium. A few employees noticed him first. Then whispers gradually faded into complete silence as more people turned toward the entrance. He walked forward with the same calm dignity he had carried every day before, never appearing uncomfortable with the attention focused upon him. Claire stepped away from the podium and faced him directly. "Nathan," she said, her voice steady but sincere, "I was wrong. I underestimated your contribution, your character, and your example. On behalf of Sterling Dynamics, I am truly sorry." The room remained perfectly still. Nathan looked around at the employees who had worked beside him through the years before answering with quiet kindness. "Thank you, Claire. Accepting responsibility takes courage. We all make decisions with incomplete understanding. What matters is whether we choose humility after the truth becomes clear." He turned toward the audience with a gentle smile. "Technology changes every year, but respect never becomes outdated. The best teams are not built by the smartest individuals. They're built by people who listen, teach, and remember that every person has value, even when that value is not immediately visible." No one applauded right away. The silence itself carried greater meaning than noise ever could. Many employees lowered their eyes, reflecting on moments when they too had overlooked quiet coworkers whose contributions rarely appeared in presentations or headlines. In that peaceful stillness, Claire understood that the company had recovered far more than a software platform. It had rediscovered the kind of character capable of building a future where dignity, humility, and respect would become the strongest foundation of all. The days that followed marked the beginning of a different chapter for Sterling Dynamics. Not because the company had introduced a revolutionary product, but because its leaders had finally begun asking better questions. Instead of searching only for the loudest ideas in the room, they started looking for the quiet people whose steady work held everything together. Early the next morning, Claire Whitmore invited Nathan Brooks into her office once again. This time there were no performance charts, no emergency alerts, and no pressure from investors waiting outside the conference room. Sunlight poured through the large windows overlooking Seattle as Claire placed a single folder on the table between them. "Nathan," she said sincerely, "I would like to ask you to return to Sterling Dynamics. Not as the employee who left last week, but as our chief systems architect with direct authority over long-term engineering strategy and technical mentorship." Nathan remained quiet for a moment before opening the folder. The position carried greater responsibility, increased compensation, and a seat on the Executive Leadership Council. He slowly closed the folder again without immediately answering. Claire watched him carefully. "If there is anything you would like to change, I am listening." Nathan smiled gently. "There are only two conditions. Claire nodded without hesitation. Please tell me. Nathan folded his hands together. First, every engineer, regardless of title or experience, deserves the opportunity to be heard before important technical decisions are finalized. Some of the best ideas come from people who are still waiting for someone to ask the right question. Claire immediately agreed. Nathan continued. Second, I will always leave in time to have dinner with my son unless there is a genuine emergency affecting people's livelihoods. No promotion is worth missing the moments that cannot be repeated. Claire smiled for the first time in days. Those are the easiest executive conditions I have ever approved. News of Nathan's return spread quickly throughout the company, but what surprised employees most was not his new title. It was how little his daily routine changed. He still arrived early carrying the same worn notebook. He still visited engineering teams instead of waiting for them to visit his office. He still asked junior developers to explain their ideas before offering his own suggestions. Within weeks, a new tradition quietly emerged. Every Friday afternoon, engineers from every department gathered for an informal design session where anyone could present a challenge without worrying about job titles or organizational charts. Nathan rarely gave immediate answers. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions that helped others discover solutions themselves. Confidence slowly replaced hesitation across the engineering organization. Claire attended several of those sessions without announcing herself, choosing a chair near the back of the room where she simply observed. She noticed that people spoke more openly than ever before. Younger employees who had once remained silent now contributed ideas that improved products and reduced unnecessary complexity. Experienced engineers listened with greater patience because they had witnessed firsthand what happened when quiet voices were ignored. The company's culture began changing in ways quarterly reports could never fully measure. Employee retention improved. Collaboration became natural instead of forced. Customers praised software reliability without realizing the greatest transformation had occurred inside the people building it. One afternoon, as Nathan prepared to leave the office, a newly hired software engineer hurried toward him. "Thank you for listening to my presentation today," she said. "Nobody has ever taken my ideas that seriously before." Nathan smiled warmly. Every person deserves to be heard before they are judged. Sometimes all confidence needs is one respectful conversation. He picked up his keys, glanced at the clock, and left the office exactly on time. Through the executive office window, Claire watched the familiar blue pickup truck disappear into the evening traffic once again. This time she did not see an employee leaving work early. She saw a father keeping a promise that no executive title could ever replace. And she finally understood that the strongest leaders were not the ones who sacrificed everything for success, but the ones who understood exactly what success was meant to protect. Several months passed, and the story people quietly shared around Sterling Dynamics was no longer about the system failure that had nearly shaken the company. Instead, they spoke about the culture that had emerged afterward. Meetings became conversations instead of competitions. Senior engineers listened before speaking. New employees discovered that asking thoughtful questions earned more respect than pretending to know every answer. Projects moved forward with greater confidence because people trusted one another as much as they trusted the technology they were building. Nathan Brooks continued leading with the same quiet consistency that had always defined him. His office door remained open, although many afternoons he could still be found sitting beside a whiteboard in the engineering department rather than behind an executive desk. He celebrated the success of others far more often than his own accomplishments, and whenever a project was completed, he made certain the newest members of the team received recognition alongside experienced leaders. Nothing about his character changed simply because his title had changed. Every weekday, at exactly 5:30 in the afternoon, Nathan gathered his notebook, wished everyone a pleasant evening, and walked toward the parking garage. At first, some employees found the routine surprising. Eventually, they understood that consistency was one of the greatest lessons he taught without ever mentioning it. Work mattered, but promises mattered more. Each evening, his familiar blue pickup truck carried him away from the glass towers of downtown Seattle and back to the small house where Owen waited with stories about school, homework spread across the dining table, and another ordinary family dinner ready to become an extraordinary memory. One autumn afternoon, Claire Whitmore happened to leave the office at the same time Nathan drove away. She paused beside the front entrance and watched the old truck disappear into the flow of evening traffic beneath golden maple trees. Michael Carter stepped beside her without saying anything for several moments. Finally, Claire smiled thoughtfully. "I used to believe leadership meant finding the smartest person in the room," she said quietly. Michael looked toward the road where the truck had vanished. "And now?" Claire folded her hands gently. "Now, I believe leadership means recognizing the people who quietly make everyone else stronger." A few weeks later, Sterling Dynamics received national recognition for engineering excellence and workplace culture. Reporters requested interviews with Claire, expecting detailed explanations about innovation and rapid growth. Instead, she told a different story. She spoke about humility, listening, mentorship, and the danger of measuring people only by what was immediately visible. She never mentioned the painful mistake as something to hide. She described it as the moment that transformed both her leadership and the future of the company. That evening, Nathan arrived home carrying a small bag of groceries. Owen met him at the front door, holding a science test marked with a perfect score. "I cannot have done it without your help," Owen said proudly. Nathan smiled and placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "You solved it yourself. I only asked a few questions." They laughed together as they prepared dinner, filling the little kitchen with the familiar sounds of clattering dishes, warm conversation, and simple gratitude. Outside, the evening settled peacefully across the neighborhood, while the lights inside their home glowed with quiet warmth. Nathan never became famous. His face never appeared on billboards or magazine covers. Yet his example continued changing lives one conversation, one decision, and one act of quiet integrity at a time. The company regained its strength because it rediscovered its foundation. A leader found wisdom because she chose humility over pride. A child learned that character speaks louder than recognition. And a single father proved that the greatest victories are rarely celebrated with applause, because the truest measure of success is returning home each evening knowing that dignity, kindness, and faithfulness are the legacy that remains long after every title has been forgotten.